Invisibility is a superpower when you know how to use it. Powerful men never look at waitresses. They are furniture with pulses, extensions of the silverware, present but unseen. At the Velvet Room, Chicago's most exclusive establishment, where billionaires and crime lords dined side by side behind soundproof velvet curtains, that invisibility kept Sierra Mitchell alive. It also meant she saw everything: the hand that drifted over the crystal decanter, the tiny vial palmed between manicured fingers, bearing a platinum family crest ring, the white powder dissolving into $2,000 scotch without a trace, without a shimmer, designed to kill slowly and leave no evidence. She counted the grains in her mind. 1 second, 2 seconds, calculating the exact dosage with the precision of a pharmacist who had once created medicines to save lives, not watch them being taken. Enough to destroy bone marrow over months. Enough to trap a man inside his own failing body while his empire crumbled around him. Sarah should have walked away, should have refilled water glasses, collected her paycheck, and gone home to her daughter. Lily was waiting with Mrs. Kowalski next door, 5 years old with a heart condition that needed $200,000 worth of surgery in 3 months. Every tip mattered. Every shift kept them one step ahead of eviction. She could not afford to be seen. She could not afford to care about men who ruled Chicago's underworld with blood and bullets. But she watched Vincent Crane reach for that glass, the king of Chicago, the man whose name made other criminals cross themselves, the man with steel gray eyes and a faded scar along his jaw, dressed in a black 3-piece suit that cost more than her annual salary. She watched his fingers close around the stem, watched his own uncle smile from across the table, waiting for the poison to reach his nephew's lips. And Sarah made a choice that would destroy everything she had built to stay hidden. If you love stories where dangerous men meet their match, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Share this with someone who needs a new obsession. Sometimes the most powerful love stories begin with a single act of courage. Sarah moved before she had time to think, her feet carrying her toward the table, as if guided by an unseen hand. Her fingers clenched around the heavy crystal water pitcher, her heart pounding so violently she could hear it in her ears, one beat after another, rapid and relentless like the drums of war. The banquet table only 3 meters away, then 2, then 1, as Vincent Crane raised his glass to his lips with a slowness that made time itself seem to sink into thick honey, and Sarah saw Richard Crane lean forward from across the table, his eyes lighting up with a look she recognized instantly, the look of a predator waiting for the prey to bite, the look of a man about to win, and she could not allow that to happen. So she reached Vincent just as the rim of the glass touched his lower lip, pretended to trip over a chair leg, her body pitching forward as the pitcher tilted in her grasp and struck Vincent's arm hard, the glass flying from his hand as $2,000 scotch spilled across the polished oak tabletop, soaking into the pristine white linen cloth and spreading like a dried bloodstain, the sound of crystal hitting wood cracking through the private dining room like a gunshot. Then silence, a suffocating silence so thick it stole the breath. Tony Bassett froze in mid-motion with his glass halfway to his mouth, as his face shifted from calm to deathly pale in an instant. Richard Crane sitting motionless as a statue with only his eyes moving from the pool of liquor to Sarah's face, and then to Vincent with something in his gaze she dared not name, but the most frightening of all was Vincent himself, who did not shout, did not slam the table, did not do anything she had imagined a mafia boss would do when an anonymous waitress spilled alcohol on him. He simply turned his head and looked at her, steel gray eyes piercing straight through the shell she had spent 3 years building, through the simple black uniform, through the panicked expression she was struggling to perform, straight into the part of her she was hiding. "I am sorry." Sarah heard her own voice trembling as her hands hurried to wipe the table with a service cloth. "Do not touch it," she whispered, the warning slipping out before she could stop herself, her instincts as a pharmacist overriding her fear. "I am truly sorry, sir. I will bring another glass immediately." Her head bowed low to avoid Vincent's gaze, even as she felt his stare burning into the back of her neck, her fingers shaking so badly she nearly dropped the crystal shards as she gathered them. "No need," Vincent's voice low and cold as stone. She looked up to find him still watching her with an expression she could not decipher. "Clean it up." The private room door flew open as Grace Chen stormed in like a gale, the manager's face draining of color at the sight before her, as she seized Sarah by the arm and dragged her out without a word to the guests, offering only a bowed head and an apologetic look, the door slamming shut behind them. "Are you insane?" Grace hissed once they reached the corridor, her nails digging into Sarah's arm. "Do you know who that is? That is Vincent Crane. You just spilled a drink on Vincent Crane." "I know," Sarah swallowed hard. I tripped. Grace stared at her as if she had grown another head. You have worked here 3 years. You have never tripped. You have never spilled a single drop. Sarah said nothing because she could not explain, could not tell Grace that she had just saved a mafia boss's life by destroying the only invisibility that protected her. Go home. Grace sighed, her anger softening into worry. I will try to handle this, but you should pray. Pray that he forgets your face. Sarah nodded, untied her apron, and walked toward the staff exit, each step heavy, as if weighted with lead, as she thought of Lily sleeping in the apartment next to Mrs. Kowalski's, thought of the $200,000 heart surgery, thought of everything she had built to survive in the shadows. All of it burned to ash just to save a man. She owed nothing. She pushed the back door open and stepped into the cold alley as November rain lashed her face like slaps. She drew in a deep breath, ready to run home, back to her daughter, back to the life she had tried to protect at any cost. And then a shadow stepped out of the darkness, tall, silent, blocking the only way forward. Miss Mitchell, a calm, even voice said, and Sarah recognized the man. Marco DeLuca, Vincent Crane's right hand. Mr. Crane would like to speak with you. Marco said nothing more. He simply stood there, blocking the alley like a wall of flesh, his cold gaze fixed on Sarah with the patience of a man who knew his prey had nowhere left to run, and Sarah glanced around to find towering brick walls on either side. The back door slammed shut behind her, and ahead of her only Marco and the darkness. She could scream, but who would hear? Who would care about a waitress dragged into a car in the middle of a rainy Chicago night? Follow me. Marco turned and walked away without checking whether she followed because he knew she would, because she had no other choice, and Sarah followed him back through the restaurant's rear entrance and up a service staircase she had never known existed, each step covered in thick red carpet that swallowed the sound of their footsteps, the narrow corridor leading to a heavy oak door at the end. Marco knocking twice, pausing for a single beat, then pushing it open, go in, and the room beyond stole Sarah's breath, not because of the luxury, though it was indeed luxurious, with a high ceiling crossed by dark wooden beams, glossy walnut-paneled walls, a fire burning in the corner casting dancing flames that threw ghost-like shadows across the room, a collection of rare whiskey bottles displayed in a glass cabinet behind a mahogany desk. But what truly took her breath away was the man seated in the shadows, Vincent Crane, sitting in a black leather chair behind the desk, his back resting in darkness with only half his face illuminated by the lone desk lamp, a whiskey glass glowing amber in his hand beneath the light, not drinking, only turning the glass slowly between long fingers as his steel-gray eyes locked onto Sarah. From the moment she crossed the threshold, the door closing behind her with a soft click that sounded like a death sentence. Sit down. Vincent gestured toward the chair opposite the desk, his voice low and never raised, yet carrying the undeniable weight of a command. And Sarah sat, her legs trembling, though she forced them still, reminding herself that she had survived 7 orphanages, survived the fists of an ex-husband, survived giving birth alone in a public hospital with $20 in her pocket, and she would not tremble before a mafia boss, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Vincent watched her in silence as 1 minute passed, then 2, the silence thick like wet cement pressing down on her shoulders with every second. He was waiting for her to speak first, waiting for her to make a mistake, and Sarah said nothing because she had learned in those orphanage years that silence was sometimes the only weapon the weak possessed, until Vincent finally set the whiskey glass on the desk, the sound of crystal against wood crashing through the quiet room like thunder. Sarah Mitchell. He said her name as if tasting each syllable. 27 years old, employed at the Velvet Room for 3 years, living in a 1-bedroom apartment on the South Side, a 5-year-old daughter named Lily with a congenital heart condition awaiting surgery. And Sarah felt the blood drain from her face because he knew everything. You have cleared my table 14 times in 3 years. Vincent continued in the same even tone, as though reciting a weather report, every time flawless, not a drop spilled, not a wasted movement. You move like a ghost, efficient and invisible. And he leaned forward so the lamp finally revealed his entire face, the scar along his jaw cutting through the firelight like a bolt of lightning, his gray eyes sharp as blades. But tonight you tripped. He emphasized each word. You, who have never tripped in 3 years, suddenly stumbled at the exact moment I raised the glass to my lips. Sarah swallowed, feeling the trap tighten around her. It was an accident, she heard herself say, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. I was tired. It was a long shift. I already apologized, and Vincent laughed. Not a warm laugh, but the laugh of a hunter when prey tries to play dead. You are not an ordinary waitress. He rose and circled the desk, stopping so close she could smell sandalwood and tobacco from his suit. I watched you all night. The way you move, calculating every step, the way your eyes scan the room like you are mapping escape routes, the way you reacted when Tony Bassett slipped something into my drink, and Sarah stopped breathing because he knew. He had seen everything. You look without looking, Vincent said as he bent down, bracing his hands on either arm of her chair and trapping her between them, his face only inches from hers, gray eyes burning into hers with an intensity that could scorch. You observe, you calculate, and you decide to act. That was not an accident, Sarah. That was a choice. His breath brushed her skin, warm and dangerous. And now you are going to tell me why an anonymous waitress would risk everything to save the life of a man like me. Sarah held his gaze, knowing that lying would not work. This man had built an empire on reading people, and would see through any falsehood she tried to offer. Yet the truth could kill her. Lying to me has been the final mistake of many people, Vincent whispered, his voice soft as velvet and sharp as a blade. And you have a daughter waiting for you at home. The word struck her like a punch to the gut. Lily, her daughter, the only reason she woke each morning, the only reason she endured anything at all. So I will ask you one more time, Vincent said as he gripped her chin and forced her to meet his eyes. Why did you save me? Sarah felt Vincent's fingers tighten around her chin. Not hard enough to cause pain, but firm enough to remind her that he could break her whenever he chose. His gray eyes fixed on her without blinking, patient and ruthless, like the gaze of a man accustomed to waiting for answers from those who did not wish to speak. And she knew he would not ask a third time. So Sarah drew a deep breath and thought of Lily, of her daughter's tooth-gapped smile whenever she came home from a shift, of the way Lily clutched her worn stuffed bear each night and begged her mother for fairy tales, of the tiny heart beating weakly in her child's chest as it waited for a surgery she had no idea how to pay for. She could not die here. Not tonight. Not while Lily still needed her. I saw it. Sarah heard her own voice emerge rough and exhausted. I saw someone put something into your drink. Vincent released her chin but did not step back, still standing there, like a wall blocking the light from the desk lamp. Who? Sarah hesitated for a single second, knowing that what she was about to say could end her life in a different way, but lying would be even more dangerous. The man sitting to your right. She swallowed hard, wearing a gray suit, salt and pepper hair, a gold ring on his pinky. Vincent did not react. Not a single muscle in his face moved, but Sarah noticed his eyes darken by a shade like the sky before a storm. Tony Bassett. He said the name, as if spitting something bitter from his mouth. You saw him put what into the glass? White powder. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to recall exactly what she had seen. Very fine, dissolved almost instantly, colorless and odorless once mixed. He hid it in his palm and dropped it in while you were speaking to someone else. Vincent narrowed his eyes. How do you know it was not sugar? Or salt? Or something harmless? The question froze her because she had already said too much, revealed too much, but it was too late to turn back now, because sugar does not dissolve instantly in alcohol. She opened her eyes and met Vincent's gaze. Salt does not either. Whatever it was dissolved like water, which means it was designed to dissolve in an alcoholic solution without leaving a trace. Only a limited number of compounds can do that, and most of them are poisons. Vincent studied her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a new tone. No longer threatening, but purely curious. You know this because... Sarah weighed her options for a few seconds. She could keep pretending, could invent a story, but the man standing before her had built an empire on detecting lies, and he would know, and when he knew she would die. I was a pharmacist. The words left her lips as if they had a will of their own. I studied pharmacology for 7 years. I know most known toxic compounds and how they react with different solutions. Vincent stepped back one pace, and for the first time that night she saw something other than cold calculation on his face. Surprise, and something else she could not read. A pharmacist, he repeated as though tasting the word. Then why is a pharmacist pouring water for criminals in a restaurant? Sarah let out a dry laugh devoid of humor. Because I am not a pharmacist anymore. I lost my license, my job, everything. She paused, swallowing the knot in her throat. And I have a daughter who needs heart surgery in 3 months. That surgery costs $200,000. I do not have $200,000. I do not even have $2,000, so I carry plates and hope the tips are enough to keep her alive one more day. Vincent walked to the desk and poured himself a fresh whiskey. He did not drink, only held the glass and watched the light refract through the amber liquid. How did you lose your license? The question stabbed an old wound, and memories surged like a tide. The brightly lit laboratory, her boss's hands on her body, the muffled sobs in the bathroom afterward, the unwanted pregnancy, the accusation of stealing a formula. I was framed. Her voice flattened as if she were telling someone else's story. The company accused me of stealing a drug formula. They revoked my license, destroyed my reputation, made sure no one in the pharmaceutical field would ever hire me again. Vincent turned back to her, his eyes no longer as sharp as before. Something smoldered behind them, something Sarah did not dare call compassion. They framed you because I knew too much. Sarah lifted her chin. Because I had evidence of what they were doing. Because I intended to expose them. So they exposed me first. The room fell into silence. The fire crackled in the hearth. Rain continued to fall beyond the windows. And Sarah sat there hollow and exhausted, waiting for her verdict. She had told the truth, and now her life rested in the hands of the man standing before her. She knew too much. Vincent finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. You know who is trying to kill me. You know what they used. And you have the knowledge to understand things most people would miss. He set the whiskey glass down and walked toward her, each step sounding like the countdown of a timed bomb. You know too much for me to let you walk away. Sarah felt her heart sink. This was the moment she died, the moment everything ended. Lily would become an orphan just as she once had been, history repeating itself in the cruelest way. But Vincent did not draw a gun, did not signal Marco. Instead, he stopped in front of her and looked down at her with an expression she could not decipher. So you will stay, he said, and you will help me find out who is trying to kill me. Sarah was certain she had misheard. She blinked at Vincent and waited for him to draw a gun or order Marco to end her life. But he merely stood there, gray eyes fixed on her with something that resembled the calculation of a man evaluating an investment. What do you want me to do? Her voice came out hoarse. Find out who is poisoning me, Vincent said, as if it were the most ordinary matter in the world. You have the knowledge, you have the eye, and you have already proven you can act when it matters. Sarah shook her head, trying to process what was happening. You have an empire, you have private doctors, you have your people everywhere. Why would you need a waitress? Because my people may be the ones trying to kill me, Vincent replied, his tone flat, though Sarah could hear something smoldering beneath it. Tony Bassett has worked for me for 15 years. He is someone I trusted. And tonight he put poison in my drink right in front of me. He paused, his jaw tightening. If he did that, then someone else is behind it. Someone powerful enough to buy my right hand. And if I do not find out who, I will die. Sarah saw the truth in his eyes. The king of Chicago, the man who made the entire underworld tremble, was being hunted by those closest to him. And he was alone enough to turn to a stranger. But she was not a charitable soul. She had a daughter to protect. And if I refuse... Vincent tilted his head and studied her as if the question intrigued him more than offended him. You will not refuse. How do you know? Because you are a mother. Vincent stepped closer, his voice lowering. You will do anything to keep your daughter alive, and I am offering you the chance to do exactly that. Sarah felt her heart quicken. What was he saying? What was he offering? Work for me, Vincent said. Find out who is trying to kill me and why. In return, your daughter will receive the best surgery from the finest doctors in the country, every cost covered by me, and you will have enough money to never carry plates for anyone again. $200,000, the number she had calculated and worried over through countless sleepless nights, the sum she knew she would never reach no matter how hard she worked. And now this man was placing it before her as if it were loose change. Sarah knew this was a trap. She knew deals with the devil always carried a price. But when she thought of Lily, of her daughter's pale lips, whenever that tiny heart struggled, she knew she had no choice. How do I know you will keep your word? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Because I am Vincent Crane, he answered without arrogance, simply stating a fact. I kill those who betray me, but I never break a promise. Ask anyone in the underworld and they will tell you the same. Sarah studied him for a long moment, searching for deception in those steel-colored eyes and finding none. Which did not make him trustworthy, but did mean she had no better option. I have a condition, she heard herself say. Vincent lifted a brow in mild amusement. You are setting conditions with me. My daughter is not dragged into any of this, Sarah said, her voice firmer than she expected. Lily does not know who you are, does not know what I do for you. She is safe, protected, and completely removed from anything dangerous. That is my only condition." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. A small motion waited like an oath. "I do not harm children," he said, his voice carrying a tone Sarah had not expected, almost gentle. "Your daughter will be safe. You have my word." She did not know why, but she believed him. Perhaps because of the way he spoke about children, perhaps because of the fleeting change in his eyes when he mentioned Lily, perhaps because belief was the only thing she had left. "So, do we have an agreement?" Vincent extended his hand. Sarah stared at it. The hand of a killer, the hand of a boss, the hand of a man who could save her daughter or destroy them both. She thought of Lily sleeping in their damp apartment, of that fragile heart beating weakly, of the 3 short months before time ran out. Then she placed her hand in Vincent's. "We have an agreement." His grip was warm and steady, not too tight, not too loose, just firm enough for her to understand this was a pact, sealed with blood and honor, by those who had nothing left to lose. "Marco will take you home tonight." Vincent released her hand. "Tomorrow morning someone will come for you and your daughter. You will move somewhere safer, and we will begin the work." Sarah rose on trembling legs. She had just sold her soul to the devil. But if the devil could save her child, then hell was worth entering. She walked to the door and grasped the handle, but before turning it, she looked back at Vincent one last time. "Why do you trust me?" she asked. "Why do you not think I will betray you like Tony Bassett?" Vincent met her gaze, and for the first time that night the corner of his mouth lifted into a faint smile. "Because you have something to lose," he replied. "And people with something to lose are always more loyal than those driven only by greed." Sarah said nothing more. She opened the door and stepped out, leaving behind the dark room and the man sitting alone in the shadows. She did not know whether she had just stepped into heaven or hell, but she knew her life would never be the same again. Morning came far too quickly, and Sarah barely slept at all, lying awake on the worn-out bed in the damp apartment, listening to Lily's steady breathing beside her, and wondering what she had done. And when the first light of dawn slipped through the torn curtain, she sat up and looked around the room. She had called home for 3 years. The walls blotched with yellowing damp stains, cockroaches crawling in the kitchen corners. She had tried to exterminate hundreds of times, only for them to return. Stacks of debt collection letters piled on the table, crimson envelopes like blood, reminding her of money she did not have. And Lily, her daughter, sleeping on a bed with sheets washed so many times they had faded to gray, her lips tinged blue even in sleep, because that tiny heart had to work too hard. And Sarah told herself she had been right to accept the devil's bargain. She had to be right, Mama. Lily's voice drifted up, drowsy and sweet. "Why are you up so early?" Sarah turned and smiled, the smile she had practiced for years, the smile that said everything was fine, even as the world collapsed. "Sweetheart, today we are moving somewhere new." Lily sat straight up, eyes wide. "Somewhere new? What kind of place? Like an adventure?" Sarah said as she smoothed her daughter's hair and struggled to keep her voice calm. "A bigger apartment, a prettier one. You will have your own room, new toys, someone to take care of you when Mama goes to work." Lily's eyes lit up. Then she tilted her head with the sudden perceptiveness of a child. "But Mama, where will we get the money?" The question pierced straight through Sarah's heart. Her daughter was only 5, and already worried about money, already knew it was something they did not have, had already learned not to ask because she understood her mother could not give. "Mama has a new job," Sarah said, and it was not entirely a lie. "A job that pays very well, well enough that we can live more comfortably." Lily studied her with eyes far older than her years, then nodded as if choosing to believe her mother no matter what. "Then I like adventures." They packed in silence, which did not take long because they owned so little. A few changes of clothes, the worn stuffed bear Lily never let go of, a handful of children's books with frayed spines, and a small box of old photographs Sarah could never bring herself to throw away. At exactly 8 in the morning, the doorbell rang. Sarah opened the door to find Marco standing there in his same severe black suit, his face unreadable, a sleek black Mercedes waiting behind him on the pothole-scarred street. "Miss Mitchell, the car is ready." Lily gripped her mother's hand as they stepped out. Mrs. Kowalski stood in the hallway watching them with concern but asking nothing. Sarah had told her they had to move, that everything would be fine, that she would be in touch. The old woman nodded and hugged Lily one last time, whispering something in Polish that Sarah did not understand but knew was a blessing. The drive to the penthouse took only 20 minutes, yet felt like traveling from one world into another. From the grimy streets of the South Side to the glass and steel towers of downtown, The car stopped before a 40-story tower overlooking Lake Michigan. Marco led them through a marble lobby, into a private elevator, up to the top floor. And when the doors opened, Lily drew in a sharp breath. "Mama," she whispered. "Is this a palace?" Sarah could not answer because she too was stunned. The penthouse spread out before them like a dream. Soaring ceilings with floor-to-ceiling windows framing all of Chicago. Polished walnut floors, cream leather sofas, an open kitchen with white marble counters, and light. Sunlight flooding every corner, warm and brilliant, utterly unlike the dim apartment they had just left. Lily let go of her mother's hand and ran to the windows, pressing her face to the glass as she looked down at the city. "Mama, I can see the lake. It is so big." Sarah watched her daughter and for the first time in years saw Lily smile like that. Pure childish joy untouched by fear or worry. And that alone was worth selling her soul to the devil. "Her room is over there," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see a petite middle-aged woman with neatly pinned black hair and a gentle face. "I am Mrs. Rossi, the housekeeper." She bowed slightly. "I will look after her while you work." Lily ran to her room, and her delighted squeals echoed through the apartment. "Mama, there is a princess bed and teddy bears." Sarah stood in the doorway and stared. The room looked like something from a fairy tale, with a canopy bed, butterfly wallpaper, and dozens of stuffed bears lined up neatly on the shelves. Someone had prepared all of this overnight, someone who knew Lily's exact age and what a 5-year-old girl would love. And Sarah did not know whether to feel grateful or afraid of that kind of power. Perhaps both. She stood at the living room window looking out at the city below. Chicago, the place she had tried to hide in for 3 years, looked entirely different from this height. Small, manageable, but she knew it was an illusion. From above, everything looked easy. Only on the ground did you learn how dangerous those streets truly were. "A golden cage is still a cage," she whispered to herself. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from an unknown number. "My office, 30 minutes. We begin." Sarah looked at Lily playing with her new bears, her clear laughter ringing out for the first time in a long while. She kissed her daughter's forehead, gave instructions to Mrs. Rossi, and stepped into the elevator. She was walking into the wolf's den, and all she could do was hope she was clever enough not to become the meal. Crane Tower rose over the heart of Chicago like a fortress of glass and steel. 45 floors of absolute power crowned by a stylized platinum crane glowing at the summit. And as Sarah stood before the main entrance and looked up, she felt smaller than she ever had. She had once worked for a major pharmaceutical company and had been accustomed to corporate towers and high-level meetings, but that belonged to another life. In this one, she was only a waitress, with worn heels and an uncertain future. Marco met her in the lobby and escorted her through layers of security. Fingerprint scanners, facial recognition, cameras at every corner, security personnel in black suits, standing rigid as statues with eyes tracking her every step. This was no ordinary company. It was the headquarters of an underground empire disguised behind a legitimate facade. A private elevator carried them to the top floor, and when the doors opened, Sarah stepped into a space she had previously seen only in luxury architecture magazines. Black marble floors, floor-to-ceiling glass walls revealing the entire city, minimalist furnishings, each piece costing more than a year of her wages, and Vincent Crane stood by the window with his back to her, gazing down at his kingdom like a king lost in thought. "Leave me alone with her," he said without turning around. Marco withdrew in silence, the door closed, and Sarah was alone with the most dangerous man in Chicago. Vincent turned, and for the first time she saw him in daylight. Last night, in the shadows of the back office, he had seemed like a god of darkness. Now, beneath the sunlight pouring through the glass, she noticed what she had missed. The dark circles beneath his eyes, carefully concealed but not fully hidden. The pallor of his skin beneath the cold beauty, and the way he moved, slightly slower, slightly more deliberate, as if every step required effort. "You are sick." Sarah did not ask. She stated it as an obvious fact. Vincent regarded her with something like approval. "You are quick to notice. I worked in a hospital during my internship," Sarah replied evenly. "I know how to recognize the signs of serious illness. You were not poisoned only once last night. You have been poisoned over a long period of time." Vincent was silent for a moment, then walked to the desk, poured himself a glass of water, and drank slowly. When he set it down, Sarah noticed a faint tremor in his hand. 5 years, he said. "The symptoms began roughly 5 years ago. Chronic fatigue that no amount of sleep cured, bleeding gums every morning when brushing my teeth, bruises appearing on my body that I do not remember causing, hair falling out in patches. I had to keep it short to hide it. He paused, his jaw tightening. My personal physician, Dr. Jonathan Mercer, said I had bone marrow failure. He offered dozens of possible explanations: genetics, environment, stress, but none of them truly explained why a healthy man of 36 suddenly had the body of a 60-year-old. Sarah stepped closer, the pharmacist in her already analyzing. Did you ever run toxicology tests? Vincent let out a short laugh devoid of humor. Dr. Mercer said it was unnecessary. He controls my entire medical file. Every test passes through his hands, so you did not know for certain you were being poisoned until last night. Until I saw Tony Bassett put something into my drink with my own eyes. Vincent nodded. I suspected it, but suspicion and certainty are not the same. And in my world, acting on suspicion can cost more than it gains. He stepped closer to Sarah, gray eyes burning into hers. But you gave me certainty. You saw what I needed to see, and now I need you to find the rest. Tony Bassett was not acting alone, Sarah said. Not a question. He was the instrument, not the one giving orders. He worked for me 15 years. Vincent moved to the window and looked down at the city. He does not have the money to acquire polonium or any high-grade toxin, nor does he have personal motive. He must be acting on someone else's command. Who has the power and money to do this? Sarah asked. Who has had frequent access to you for 5 years? Vincent was silent for a long time, and when he turned back his face had become an emotionless mask, though Sarah saw his eyes darken by a shade. My family, he said, his voice flat like a lake before a storm. My inner circle, my personal physician, everyone I trust most has access to my food, my drink, and my personal space, so who among them wants you dead? Vincent walked to the desk, opened a drawer, and removed a leather case. He placed it on the desk and opened it. Inside were small vials of blood, sealed bags containing hair samples, and a handwritten list. These are samples of my blood and hair, he said. This is a list of everything I regularly consume and where it comes from, and this is a list of those with the most access to me. Sarah studied the list. It was short. Richard Crane, paternal uncle, Tony Bassett, financial aid, Dr. Jonathan Mercer, personal physician, and several other names she did not recognize. I need you to analyze these samples, Vincent said. Identify the exact toxin used, the dosage, the timeline, and most importantly, the source. If we know what they used, we can trace where it was acquired, and if we know where it was acquired, we will know who stands behind it. Sarah looked at the vials containing the blood of the man standing before her, the blood of the King of Chicago, the blood of a killer, the blood of a man dying slowly. Do you have a laboratory? She asked. Vincent nodded. I have prepared a mobile laboratory for you, every piece of equipment you need, from spectrometers to mass analyzers. If you require anything else, just say so. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time saw something beyond cold calculation in those steel eyes: exhaustion, depletion, and something that resembled restrained fear. The King of Chicago was afraid, not of enemies, not of rivals, but of those he trusted most. I will find out, Sarah said, her voice carrying a certainty that surprised even herself. I will find who is doing this to you. Vincent studied her for a long moment, then nodded. A small movement carrying a weight of trust she was not sure she deserved. I know you will, he said, because if you do not, both of us will die. Sarah picked up the leather case, feeling its weight in her hands, the weight of secrets, the weight of a life, the weight of a race against death she could not afford to lose. 3 days later, Sarah sat inside the mobile laboratory Vincent had prepared for her, surrounded by the most advanced analytical equipment money could buy: mass spectrometers, gas chromatography systems, elemental analyzers. All of it brand new and unused, as if Vincent had purchased the entire setup solely for this investigation. Yet before analyzing any samples, she needed to understand her enemy. She needed to know who had motive to want Vincent dead, and to do that, she needed to understand the history of the Crane family. Marco arrived in the afternoon to escort her to collect additional samples from various locations Vincent frequented, and inside the car, Sarah decided to draw information from the man sitting directly in front of her. How long have you worked for Vincent? She asked in a tone of casual curiosity. Marco studied her through the rearview mirror with a measuring gaze. 18 years, since Mr. Crane was still alive. Mr. Crane, Sarah raised a brow. You mean Marcus Crane? Marco nodded without taking his eyes off the road. Marcus Crane, Vincent's father, founder of the Crane Empire. He was a legend, built everything from nothing. When I started, he was just a small-time dealer on the South Side. 20 years later, he owned half of Chicago. Sarah remained silent, allowing Marco to continue. Some people see what others cannot. Marcus Crane was one of them. Not just intelligent, but able to read people like books, knowing who to trust, who to avoid, who to eliminate. He does not sound like a man easy to bring down. Marco went quiet for a few seconds, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. How did he die? Sarah asked. A car accident, Marco replied in a voice flat as frozen water. 15 years ago. His car went off a cliff on Lakeshore Drive. They said the brakes failed. They said Sarah caught the doubt immediately. Marco did not answer right away, driving in silence for several minutes as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he exhaled. Marcus Crane was not careless. He checked his car daily, had a private team of mechanics. His brakes could not simply fail. You think he was murdered? Marco glanced at her through the mirror, his gaze heavy. I do not think. I know. But no one dared investigate. No one dared ask questions. After Marcus died, Vincent took over. He was only 21 years old. Too young, too unseasoned, but there was no one else. Sarah recalled the list Vincent had given her. Richard Crane, paternal uncle. What about Richard Crane? She asked. Marcus's brother. Why did he not take control? Marco was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice dropped so low. Sarah had to lean forward to hear. Richard handled finances, brilliant with numbers but lacking leadership. When Marcus died, he managed things temporarily while Vincent was trained. Afterward, he stepped back into an advisory role. That sounds like he accepted a secondary position too easily. Marco did not reply, and his silence spoke louder than words. Sarah stared out the window, watching Chicago streets slide past as a picture began forming in her mind. An empire built by a genius. The genius dies in a suspicious accident. His brother manages briefly, but power ultimately passes to the nephew. And now, 15 years later, that nephew is dying slowly from poison. Who benefits most if Vincent dies? She asked, knowing she was asking a dangerous question. Marco stopped the car in front of an old building on the north side, shut off the engine, and turned to face her with eyes worn by years of witnessing too much. You are intelligent, he said. You already know the answer. Sarah nodded. Richard Crane. If Vincent dies without an heir, Richard becomes the only family member able to take control. The empire becomes his. Marco opened the door but paused before stepping out. I cannot tell Mr. Crane what I suspect, he said gravely. Richard is his uncle, the man who stood by him when Marcus died, the man who taught him everything about running the empire. If I am wrong, I will destroy the only family bond he has left. And if you are right, Marco looked at her, his gaze heavy, then Vincent will learn that the man he loved like a father murdered his real father and is now murdering him. He stepped out of the car. You are an outsider, he said over his shoulder. You can uncover the truth without emotion, clouding your judgment. Find proof and let the proof speak for you. Sarah stepped out of the car, her mind reeling with new revelations. She was no longer investigating a poisoning. She was unraveling a 15-year conspiracy. One that may have killed Vincent's father and was now killing Vincent himself. And if Richard Crane truly stood behind it all, then he was not merely a murderer, but a monster wearing the face of family. And she would have to prove it. That night, Sarah did not sleep. She sat inside the mobile laboratory installed in a separate room of the penthouse, cold fluorescent light washing over test tubes and analytical instruments, while Lily had long since fallen asleep under warm blankets after Mrs. Rossi read her fairy tales, and Sarah now faced the secrets hidden in the blood of a Mafia king. She began with the blood sample, the preparation process taking nearly 2 hours, step by step, careful and precise, just as she had been trained, centrifuging to separate plasma, adding buffer solutions, preparing the sample for the mass spectrometer, and when she loaded it into the machine and pressed start, she leaned back and waited, her heart steady with the practiced patience of someone accustomed to laboratory work. 30 minutes later, the results appeared on the screen. Sarah studied the numbers and graphs, her brow tightening. She reran the process once, unable to believe what she was seeing. Then a third time, the results remained unchanged. Polonium-210, the highly toxic radioactive substance she had suspected from the very first night she saw Tony Bassett slip powder into Vincent's drink. Yet what shocked her was not its presence but its concentration. The levels in Vincent's blood were not high enough to kill immediately. It was a stabilized, diluted isotope variant, designed for microdosing. Someone had been introducing this modified polonium into his body in small, regular doses over a long period of time, killing him slowly, day by day, week by week, like watching a candle burn down to the wick. Sarah moved on to the hair samples, hair being the body's biological journal recording everything that passes through the bloodstream over time. If analyzed correctly, it could reveal when the poisoning began. She cut the hair into small segments, each representing roughly 1 month of growth, then analyzed them one by one, starting from the root closest to the scalp and moving outward toward the tip. The results unfolded like a horror story written in the language of chemistry. The segment nearest the root, representing the most recent month, contained the highest concentration of polonium. Farther along the strand, the levels decreased, but never disappeared. Sarah calculated silently, matching hair length to average growth rate, 5 years. Polonium had been present in Vincent's body for approximately 5 years, exactly matching the timeline he had described when his symptoms first began. She sat motionless before the screen as the implications crashed over her. 5 years of systematic poisoning, not a single incident, not an accident, but a long-term plan executed with patience and chilling cruelty. The perpetrator did not simply want Vincent dead. He wanted him to die slowly, painfully, without raising suspicion, to watch him weaken as a perverse form of pleasure. And to accomplish this for 5 years without detection, the person had to be very close to Vincent, with daily access to his food, his drinks, or his medication, someone Vincent trusted completely and never questioned. Sarah looked again at the list Vincent had given her. Richard Crane, Tony Bassett, Dr. Jonathan Mercer, among them, who had the most consistent access over 5 years. Tony had been exposed, but he was merely the instrument. The one behind him needed the wealth to acquire polonium, 210 on the black market. Polonium was not something found at a corner pharmacy. It was produced only in a handful of nuclear reactors worldwide, primarily in Russia, and its black market price could reach millions of dollars for a usable quantity. Who on that list had millions? Who had the power to connect with radioactive traffickers? Who had a motive strong enough to wait 5 years just to kill one man? The answer flashed through Sarah's mind like lightning, yet she did not dare accept it without proof. She needed evidence, not speculation, hard evidence that could not be denied. She saved all analytical results, printed multiple copies, and hid them in separate locations. Then she texted Vincent, "Need to see you, now." The reply came within a minute. "Come to my office." Vincent was seated behind his desk when Sarah entered, his face more worn than the last time she saw him. Under the lights, the signs of deterioration were even clearer. Gray skin, sunken eyes, cracked lips, a body destroying itself from within. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Sarah placed the results on the desk. Polonium 210. You have been poisoned for 5 years in low but consistent doses. Not once, not randomly. Someone planned your death a long time ago and nearly succeeded. Vincent stared at the papers, his face frozen like carved stone. No muscle moved, no emotion surfaced. Yet Sarah saw his hand curl into a fist on the desktop, knuckles bleaching white. 5 years, he repeated, his voice flat in a way that chilled her. Someone has been killing me for 5 years and I never knew. Sarah nodded. And that person must be very close to you, with daily access, and enough money and connections to acquire polonium on the black market. Vincent looked at her, his steel-gray eyes now dark as a moonless night. You are talking about Richard? I do not yet have direct proof, Sarah said, but he fits every criterion: power, wealth, access. And if what I have heard about your father's death is true— She stopped. Vincent raised a hand to halt her. He picked up the list and read each name again, as if searching for an alternative answer. An enemy who was not bound by blood, but in the end his gaze stopped on one name, and Sarah saw something fracture inside those steel eyes. 2 days later, Marco brought Sarah to Richard Crane's private office, while he was reportedly out of town for a business meeting. At least that was what they had been told, and Sarah did not know whether the meeting was real or fabricated. She only knew this was her one chance to gather evidence without being detected. Richard's office sat on the 38th floor of Crane Tower, just 7 floors below Vincent's, close enough that he could ride the elevator up to see his nephew at any time, close enough that he could control everything. Vincent ate or drank without arousing suspicion. Marco stood guard outside the door, while Sarah went in. She had 30 minutes. No more. The room was furnished with a classic aesthetic entirely unlike Vincent's modern minimalism. An elaborately carved oak desk, floor-to-ceiling bookcases filled with leather-bound volumes, and on the wall framed family photographs displayed with reverence. Sarah stopped before an old photograph in which Marcus Crane stood at the center, tall and imposing, with one hand on a young Vincent's shoulder and the other on Richard's. 3 men facing the camera with 3 different smiles. Marcus smiling with the confidence of a man who owned the world, Vincent smiling shyly like a boy on the brink of adulthood, and Richard smiling in a way that never reached his eyes. Sarah photographed the picture with her phone and began to search, opening drawers, flipping through files, carefully returning everything to its exact place after inspection. Most of it was routine financial documentation, tax reports, business contracts, accounting ledgers, but then she found a locked cabinet in the corner of the room. Small, discreet, almost hidden behind a large potted plant. She looked around for a key and found none. Yet life in 7 orphanages had taught her many things, including how to open a simple lock with a hairpin. 2 minutes later, the cabinet door swung open. Inside sat a white porcelain teapot with blue patterns. Beside it, a small box containing fine white powder, and beneath them a stack of documents bound together. Sarah pulled on the rubber gloves she had brought and carefully collected samples from the teapot and the powder box, her heart racing as she realized this could be the decisive proof. If the teapot tested positive for polonium, it would mean Richard had used it to poison Vincent directly. She photographed everything from every angle, every detail, making sure nothing was missed. Then she opened the stack of papers and began to read. Invoices, dozens of invoices from a company called Eastgate Chemical Supplies, based in Prague in the Czech Republic, each invoice totaling 6 figures paid through a Swiss bank account, and the recipient's signature listed as Tony Bassett. Sarah photographed every page, her hands trembling slightly with a mix of excitement and dread. This was not merely proof of chemical purchases. It was a paper trail showing who paid and who received. Tony was the executor, but the money came from Richard. She searched further and found a small black leather notebook. Inside were handwritten entries with dates and quantities meticulously recorded, like a diary. March 12th, Year 1, 20 milligrams via morning tea. March 15th, 15 milligrams via coffee. March 20th, 25 milligrams via liquor. Nausea rose in Sarah's throat. This was not a business ledger. This was a poisoning journal. Richard Crane had recorded every dose, every method, every time he introduced poison into his nephew's body, as if tracking a scientific experiment. 5 years, hundreds of doses, day by day, and he had done it with a smile, with feigned concern whenever Vincent grew tired or ill. Sarah photographed the entire notebook page by page without missing a single line, then returned everything to its place, locked the cabinet, and stepped out of the office. 27 minutes. She had 3 minutes to spare. Marco looked at her with questions in his eyes but said nothing. They rode the elevator down in silence, both knowing that what Sarah had just uncovered would change everything. Once they reached the car, Sarah finally spoke. "I need to get back to the laboratory," her voice trembling slightly. "I have enough evidence now." Marco nodded and drove off. Sarah sat in the back seat, staring out the window without truly seeing anything, her mind filled with the image of the black leather notebook and its neat handwritten lines. Each dose, each date, each step in the plan to murder his own nephew. She had found the killer. Now she had to find a way to make Vincent see the truth without shattering him. But how do you tell someone that the second father who raised and protected them for 15 years is the man who killed their real father and is now killing them too? Sarah had no answer. She only had evidence, and sometimes evidence is more cruel than any words. 2 days later, Marco brought Sarah to Richard Crane's private office while he was supposedly out of town for a business meeting. At least that was what they had been told, and Sarah did not know whether the meeting truly existed or not. She only knew this was her one and only chance to gather evidence without being discovered. Richard's office was located on the 38th floor of Crane Tower, only 7 floors below Vincent's, close enough that he could take the elevator up to see his nephew at any moment, close enough that he could control everything Vincent ate or drank without anyone suspecting a thing. Marco stood guard outside the door while Sarah stepped inside. She had 30 minutes, no more. The room was decorated in a classical style, entirely different from Vincent's modern minimalism. An intricately carved oak desk, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, and on the walls family photographs framed with solemn reverence. Sarah paused before an old photograph. Marcus Crane standing at the center, tall and commanding, one hand resting on a young Vincent's shoulder, and the other on Richard's. 3 men facing the camera with 3 very different smiles. Marcus smiling with the confidence of a man who owned the world, Vincent smiling awkwardly like a boy on the edge of adulthood, and Richard smiling in a way that never reached his eyes. Sarah photographed the image with her phone and began to search, opening each drawer, flipping through every folder, carefully returning everything to its exact place after inspection. Most of it was ordinary financial paperwork, tax reports, business contracts, accounting records. But then she found a locked cabinet in the corner of the room, small, discreet, almost hidden behind a large potted plant. She searched for a key, and found none, yet surviving 7 orphanages had taught her many things, including how to open a simple lock with a hairpin. 2 minutes later, the cabinet door opened. Inside was a white porcelain teapot decorated with blue patterns. Beside it a small box containing fine white powder, and at the bottom a bundle of documents bound together. Sarah slipped on the rubber gloves she had brought and carefully collected samples from the teapot and the powder, her heart pounding faster as she realized this could be the decisive proof. If the teapot tested positive for polonium, it would mean Richard had used it directly to poison Vincent. She photographed everything from every angle, every detail, making sure nothing was missed. Then she opened the documents and began to read. Invoices. Dozens of invoices from a company called Eastgate Chemical Supplies based in Prague, in the Czech Republic, each invoice totaling 6-figure amounts paid through a Swiss bank account, and the recipient's signature listed as Tony Bassett. Sarah photographed every page, her hands trembling slightly with a mix of fear and exhilaration. This was not merely proof of chemical purchases. It was a paper trail, showing who paid and who received. Tony was the executor, but the money came from Richard. She searched further and found a small black leather notebook. Inside were handwritten entries with dates and quantities, recorded meticulously like a diary. March 12th of the first year, 20 milligrams via morning tea. March 15th, 15 milligrams via coffee. March 20th, 25 milligrams via liquor. Nausea rose in Sarah's throat. This was not business documentation. This was a poisoning journal. Richard Crane had recorded every dose, every method, every instance of introducing poison into his nephew's body as if tracking a scientific experiment. 5 years, hundreds of doses, day by day. And he had done it with a smile, with feigned concern each time Vincent appeared tired or ill. Sarah photographed the entire notebook page by page without missing a single line, then returned everything to its place, locked the cabinet, and stepped out of the office. 27 minutes. She still had 3 minutes to spare. Marco looked at her with questions in his eyes but said nothing. They rode the elevator down in silence, both knowing that what Sarah had uncovered would change everything. When they reached the car, Sarah finally spoke. "I need to get back to the laboratory," her voice trembling slightly. "I have enough evidence now." Marco nodded and drove away. Sarah sat in the back seat staring out the window without truly seeing anything, her mind filled with the image of the black leather notebook and its neat handwritten lines. Each dose, each date, each step in the plan to murder his own nephew. She had found the killer. Now she had to find a way to make Vincent face the truth without shattering him. But how do you tell someone that the second father who raised and protected them for 15 years is the man who murdered their real father and is now murdering them as well? Sarah had no answer. She only had evidence, and sometimes evidence is more cruel than any words. Sarah sat across from Vincent in his office, the leather briefcase heavy with evidence resting on the desk between them like a bomb waiting to detonate. Outside the glass, Chicago sank into dusk, as the sky shifted from orange to purple and then to black like a spreading bruise. She had spent the entire day analyzing the samples taken from Richard's office, and the results left no room for doubt. The teapot tested positive for polonium-210. The powder box contained the toxin in a purity strong enough to kill 10 people, and the notebook recorded each dose like a handwritten indictment from the killer himself. She laid each piece of evidence on the desk, arranging them in logical order, the way she had done hundreds of times back when she worked in pharmaceutical laboratories. Photographs of invoices from Eastgate Chemical Supplies, lab results from the teapot samples, photographs of every page of the notebook, and finally a flowchart tracing money from Richard's secret account through Tony Bassett to the chemical supplier in Prague. "This is the evidence," Sarah said, her voice steady the way she had practiced all night. The pharmaceutical-grade diluted polonium was purchased through a shell company in Eastern Europe. Tony Bassett signed for delivery, but the payments came from Richard Crane's personal account. And this notebook, she paused and swallowed. This notebook records every dose he administered to you over the past 5 years. Every day, every milligram, every method. Vincent did not look at the evidence. He looked at Sierra, his steel-gray eyes now empty like twin voids. "Are you certain?" 100%, Sarah answered. "I ran every test 3 times. There is no error. Richard Crane killed your father 15 years ago, and has been killing you for the past 5 years. Silence followed, stretching so long Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. She watched Vincent and waited for something. Anger, grief, denial, anything. But he remained seated, motionless as stone, staring into nothing with the gaze of a man whose soul had just been torn out. Then he stood, slowly, mechanically, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. He walked to the window and turned his back to her, looking out at the city slipping into darkness. "After my father died," Vincent said, his voice low and distant as if coming from somewhere deep underground, "I was only 21. I knew nothing about running an empire. I was afraid of failing, afraid of not being worthy of him, afraid everything would collapse because I was not strong enough." He stopped, his shoulders trembling slightly. "Richard stayed with me. He taught me how to read people, how to negotiate, how to decide. He stayed up late with me on nights I could not sleep under the weight of it all. He told me my father would be proud of me." His voice broke. "He told me he loved me like a son." Sarah did not know what to say. She sat still as she watched the steel wall Vincent had built over a lifetime begin to fracture piece by piece. The King of Chicago, the man who made the entire underworld tremble, was collapsing before her eyes under the betrayal of the last family member he believed he had. And then the wall shattered. Vincent turned and grabbed the desk lamp, hurling it into the wall as glass exploded like a scream. He slammed his fist onto the desk, sweeping papers to the floor, kicked over a chair, tore framed photos from the walls, punched the glass cabinet, until blood ran from split knuckles. Sarah jumped to her feet but did not flee. She stood there with her back against the wall, watching the man destroy himself in a storm of rage. She had seen this before, in children at orphanages when they learned their parents had abandoned them, in patients when they received terminal diagnoses, in herself when she realized the man she loved had betrayed her. This was not the fury of a mafia boss. This was the pain of a child stabbed in the back by the person he loved most. Vincent's shouts eventually faded. He stood amid the wreckage of the office, shoulders shaking, breath ragged, blood dripping from his hands onto the marble floor. "He killed my father," he whispered, his voice shattered. "He held me at the funeral and said he would take care of me. He promised to protect me the way my father had, and all that time he was killing my father." He lifted his head, eyes red but dry. Men like Vincent do not cry. They forget how long ago. And now he is killing me, the same way, slowly, painfully, as if he wants to watch me die day by day. Sarah stepped closer, her shoes crunching on broken glass, but she did not care. She stopped in front of him, looked up into his agony-filled eyes, and did something she never imagined she would do with a mafia boss. She placed her hand on his shoulder. Vincent stiffened, his body taut as wire as if bracing for an attack. Perhaps he was too used to every touch carrying pain or hidden intent, but Sarah demanded nothing. She simply stood there, her small hand resting on his shoulder, a fragile anchor in the storm tearing him apart from the inside. And strangely, Vincent did not push her away. He stood still, his shoulders gradually lowering, his breathing slowing. Her presence did not heal the wound, but it reminded him he was not entirely alone in this darkness. "I will kill him," Vincent said, his voice cold as ice. "I will kill him with my own hands." "No," Sarah replied, calm but firm. "Not yet." Vincent looked at her, brow tightening. "You dare stop me. You dare stop me from killing the man who murdered my father and is murdering me. I am stopping you from acting without thinking." Sarah did not flinch from his fury. "If you kill Richard now without public proof, the other underbosses will believe you murdered your uncle without cause. The empire will fracture into civil war. Everything you built will collapse, and Richard will win even in death." Vincent fell silent, jaw clenched. He knew she was right no matter how much he hated it. "We need Richard to confess," Sarah continued. "Publicly, in front of those with power in your empire, so no one can doubt you have just cause, and after that," she met Vincent's eyes, "you may do whatever you wish to him, and I will not stop you." The days that followed passed in a state of taut anticipation, as Vincent and Sarah planned the trap for Richard, knowing they needed time to make every detail flawless, and in the meantime, something Sarah had never expected began to happen. Vincent started appearing at the penthouse. The first time he said it was to check security. The second time he claimed he needed to discuss the plan further. The third time he offered no reason at all. He simply appeared, sat on the cream-colored leather sofa, and stared out the window with distant eyes. And Sierra understood. After learning the truth about Richard, Vincent no longer wanted to be alone in his own penthouse or his cold office, places saturated with memories of the uncle he had loved like a father, memories that now cut like knives. And that afternoon, as Sarah worked in the laboratory, she heard Lily's voice from the living room, asking with pure curiosity and no fear at all, "Who are you?" Sarah rushed out in alarm, afraid her daughter was facing the most dangerous man in Chicago. But the sight that stopped her short at the doorway was not what she expected. Lily stood in front of Vincent with her hands planted on her hips, chin lifted, staring up at the man twice her height with a seriousness that was almost comical. While Vincent, the king of Chicago, the man who made hardened criminals cross themselves, stood frozen as if he had no idea how to respond to a 5-year-old questioning him. "I am Vincent," he finally said, his voice strangely awkward. "I am a friend of your mother." Lily tilted her head, her wide eyes studying him closely. "Are you a bad person?" The question stunned both Sierra and Vincent. Sierra almost intervened, but she wanted to see how Vincent would answer. He looked down at the child, his face usually cold as ice now carrying something Sarah had never seen before, uncertainty, and perhaps a hint of shame. Vincent began and stopped, not knowing how to explain to a 5-year-old that he was a crime lord, a killer, a man the world considered a monster. "My mom says, no one is completely bad," Lily continued as if lecturing him. "She says there are only people who do bad things, but people who do bad things can still do good things. Like the bad uncle in the fairy tale. He was very bad, but in the end he saved the princess." The child looked at Vincent with clear, hopeful eyes. "So are you doing good things?" Vincent knelt down until his face was level with Lily's. The first time Sarah had ever seen him lower himself before anyone. "I am trying," he said so softly. Sarah almost missed it. "I am trying to do good things." Lily smiled, a bright sun breaking through clouds. "Then you are not a bad person," she declared, as if stating the most obvious truth in the world. "You are just someone learning to be better." And before either Sarah or Vincent could react, Lily took his hand and tugged him toward her play corner. "Will you read to me? Mom is very busy, and Mrs. Rossi does not read as well as Mom. I want a story about a princess and a dragon." Vincent looked down at the tiny hand gripping his, then up at Sierra as if asking permission, and Sierra nodded, the corner of her mouth lifting into a small smile. And so Vincent Crane, the king of Chicago, sat down on the floor beside a 5-year-old child, took a pink-covered book with a princess on it, and began to read in his deep, warm voice, "Once upon a time in a kingdom far away." Sierra stood in the doorway watching the scene, her heart tightening. Lily sat pressed against Vincent, her head resting on his arm, eyes wide as she listened to every word, and Vincent, whose face was usually carved from stone, looked strangely gentle as he read about princesses and dragons. In the days that followed, Vincent came more often. He read to Lily every evening, watched her draw messy, colorful pictures, listened as she told him about her strange dreams. And one afternoon when Sarah returned to the penthouse after a long day in the laboratory, she saw a new drawing taped to the refrigerator. Lily had drawn 3 figures standing together beneath a large house, a long-haired woman, a tiny girl, and a tall man in a black suit. And beneath it, in the crooked letters of a 5-year-old, Lily had written a single word: family. Sarah stood staring at the drawing for a long time, not knowing whether to smile or cry. She turned and saw Vincent watching her from the sofa, his gray eyes holding a light she had never seen before. That night after Lily had gone to bed, the child padded out of her room just long enough to whisper something to Sarah before returning to sleep. "Mommy, Uncle Vincent is very sad," Lily said seriously. "He needs a friend. You have to be his friend, okay?" That night Sarah woke to an unfamiliar sound coming from the living room. She glanced at the clock on the bedside table and saw it was 2 a.m. Lily was sleeping soundly in the next room, her steady breathing carrying through the thin wall, and Sarah slipped quietly out of bed, pulled on a light sweater, and stepped outside. The living room lights were off, lit only by the pale glow of the city below, filtering through the glass, and in that dimness she saw Vincent, sitting on the sofa with his back curved inward, his head cradled in his hands. Even in the darkness she could see his shoulders shaking, his breathing heavy and uneven. She had seen these symptoms in the medical records Dr. Mercer had left behind: end-stage bone marrow failure, severe bone and joint pain, a body destroying itself from the inside. "Vincent," Sierra called softly as she moved closer. He lifted his head, his face paper pale under the faint city light. sweat beading on his forehead, lips pressed so tightly they had gone white. Steel, gray eyes, usually sharp now, clouded with pain. "Go back to bed," he said, his voice hoarse and trembling. "I am fine. Do not lie to me," Sarah replied as she knelt in front of him. "I am a pharmacist. I know how much pain you are in. Why did you not call Dr. Mercer?" Vincent let out a bitter sound that was more pain than laughter. "Mercer may be Richard's man. I do not trust anyone on my medical team anymore, and I do not want them to know how weak I am." He paused as another wave of pain tore through his spine, and his body clenched. "In my world, weakness means death." Sarah said nothing more. She stood and went into the mobile laboratory, returning with a painkiller she had compounded herself in the earliest days. She knew the ingredients, she knew the dosage, and she knew it was the only thing Vincent could take without fearing it had been tampered with. She came back to the living room, sat beside him, and placed the pill and a glass of water in his hand. "Take it." "I made it myself. There is nothing in it but pain relief." Vincent looked at the pill resting in his palm, and then at Sarah. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he swallowed it, drank the water, and leaned back against the sofa. 20 minutes later, his eyes were clearer, his breathing steadier, his shoulders no longer rigid. The medication had begun to work, though Sarah knew the pain would return. It always did. "Thank you," Vincent murmured, his voice exhausted. "Do not thank me," Sarah replied, remaining beside him. "This is my job." "No." Vincent turned his head to look at her, his gray eyes clearer now, but also more exposed. "You did not have to do this. You could have left me here and gone back to sleep. No one would have blamed you." "I do not abandon people who are suffering," Sarah said as she gazed out through the glass into the Chicago night. "Even when that person is a Mafia boss." Silence settled over the room, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that falls between two people who are tired of pretending and willing to be real with each other, if only for one night. "Tell me," Vincent said suddenly. "Tell you what? About you. About your life. About everything that turned a brilliant pharmacist into a waitress in my restaurant." Sarah was silent for a long time. She had never told her story to anyone, not because of shame, but because she never believed anyone would care. Yet tonight, in the darkness beside a man who was slowly dying, she felt the need to speak. "To be known. I was orphaned when I was 8, she began, her voice soft as breath. "My parents died in a house fire. They said it was an electrical fault. I do not know if that was true. I only know that one night I went to sleep with my parents, and the next morning I woke up in a hospital and they told me I had no one left." She spoke of 7 orphanages, each worse than the last, of beatings, of hunger, of teaching herself enough to earn a university scholarship because it was the only escape from the system. She told him about becoming a pharmacist, about the pride of feeling valuable for the first time in her life, then about her boss, about that night in the laboratory, about fighting and losing, about the unwanted pregnancy she chose to keep because it was the only thing that truly belonged to her, about being framed to silence her, about the husband she met at her lowest point who beat her, took her money, and left when he learned Lily had a heart condition. When she finished, the sky was already lightening, the first hint of dawn slipping between the skyscrapers and turning the Chicago sky pink. Vincent did not speak throughout her story. He only listened, gray eyes fixed on her as though he were seeing her for the first time. "You are stronger than anyone I have ever known," he finally said, his voice low and sincere. "I thought I understood suffering, but compared to you I was only a child raised in silk." Sarah let out a dry, tired laugh. "Suffering is not a competition. There are no medals for who hurts the most." He looked at her with an expression she could not decipher. Then, unexpectedly, he raised his hand and gently brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. The gesture froze her. Her heart began to race, her breath caught. "Why did you save me?" Vincent whispered. "That night at the restaurant. You owed me nothing. You did not know me. Why did you risk everything for a stranger?" Sarah did not know the answer, or perhaps she did and was afraid to admit it. She only knew that when she saw Vincent lift the poisoned glass to his lips, something inside her had refused to let her walk away. "Because I have seen too many people die," she whispered, "and I did not want to watch one more." Their eyes met in the early dawn light, and the distance between them slowly closed as if time itself were slowing. Sarah could feel Vincent's breath on her lips, warm and light. He gave her the chance to pull away. She did not. Their first kiss was as soft as a butterfly's wing, hesitant, searching, filled with unanswered questions. It ended too quickly, yet lasted long enough to change everything. Sierra drew back, her lips trembling, her heart pounding. "We should not," she began. "I know," Vincent replied, his voice rough, but he did not apologize. And looking into his eyes, Sarah knew that neither of them regretted it. The following day they did not speak of the kiss, did not speak of the sleepless night, did not speak of the confessions whispered in the dark. Yet something between them had shifted, an invisible thread quietly drawn tight, and both of them felt it even without words. And that afternoon Vincent convened a meeting in the main office at Crane Tower, with only 3 people present: Vincent, Sierra, and Marco. The doors sealed shut, and the electronic jamming system activated to ensure no one could listen in. "We have 2 weeks," Vincent began, his voice once again carrying the familiar cold authority of a kingpin, though Sarah noticed how his eyes occasionally drifted toward her with a softer edge. "2 weeks before my body collapses completely, 2 weeks to finish Richard before he finishes me." Marco nodded grimly and asked how he wanted to proceed. "I want him to confess," Vincent said, "publicly and recorded, so no one in the Empire can ever claim I acted without cause, and I want him to know he lost before he dies." Sarah stepped to the table where she had already laid out a detailed plan, crafted through nights without sleep, in which she had considered every scenario and every risk. "Richard is intelligent," she began. "He killed Marcus, and poisoned you for 5 years without being detected. He will not confess unless he believes he has already won." She looked at Vincent and continued, "So we will let him believe exactly that." Vincent raised a brow and asked if she wanted him to fake his death. "Not that far," Sarah replied calmly but close. "We will let Richard know you are dying, that your time is nearly over, and that you wish to see him to pass on the Empire before you go." She paused to let it sink in. "Richard has been waiting for this moment for 5 years. That is why he poisoned you slowly instead of killing you outright. He wanted to watch you weaken, to watch you suffer, and most importantly, he wanted to receive the Empire from your hands legally as if it were the final wish of a dying nephew." Marco nodded in understanding and said Richard would not be able to resist that temptation after 15 years of waiting. "And when he comes," Sarah continued, "when he believes you are too weak to fight back, he will lower his guard, and men like Richard, who have kept secrets for so long, always want to boast when they think they are safe. They want their victim to know exactly how they were defeated before they die." Vincent studied her with an expression of half admiration and half surprise, and remarked that she understood criminal psychology well, to which Sarah replied evenly that she understood human psychology, and that evil men and good men shared the same weaknesses, the desire to be acknowledged. Marco spread a map across the desk and asked about the location. "The Crane Estate, in Lake Forest," Vincent said, his voice darkening. "The place where my father was killed 15 years ago." Sarah hesitated, but Vincent's eyes hardened as he said, "Richard killed my father there, and he will pay there. This is justice." Marco agreed and said he would position loyal men around the estate to ensure no one entered or left without Vincent's order. Then Sarah addressed the recording devices, explaining she would install them in the master bedroom where Vincent would pretend to be dying. Micro recorders hidden in the bedside lamp, the picture frame, and the button of Vincent's shirt, 3 independent sources to ensure nothing was missed. Vincent approved and asked about Tony Bassett. Marco replied that Tony had disappeared after the night at the restaurant, but was still being tracked, and remained in contact with Richard through a secure phone. If Richard went to the estate, Tony would likely accompany him, which Sarah noted was a risk, since Tony knew she had seen him poison the drink and would be alert if he saw her. "Then you will stay hidden until Richard is fully in the trap." Vincent decided, "You will be in the control room, monitoring the recordings and only appear if necessary." Sarah agreed, even though part of her did not want to leave Vincent alone at the most dangerous moment, but she knew he was right. Her presence could compromise everything. When Marco asked when they would begin, Vincent answered tomorrow and said he would call Richard that night and tell him he wanted to see him one last time before dying. Richard would come because he had waited too long to miss this moment. The meeting ended with Marco leaving to prepare, while Vincent and Sarah remained alone in the large office, as sunset bled red across the Chicago skyline. "Are you afraid?" Vincent asked without turning. Sarah stood beside him, looking out over the darkening city, and admitted she was, but not for herself. When he asked for whom, she turned to him and said, "For you. For what will happen when you face the man who betrayed you. For what you will have to do to end this." Vincent was silent for a long moment before reaching for her hand and weaving his fingers through hers, his grip firm but gentle. "You will be there when it ends." She squeezed his hand in return and said she would, and that she promised. The Crane estate lay deep within a maple forest in Lake Forest. roughly an hour's drive from downtown Chicago. And that night, the first snow of the season began to fall, laying a thin white veil over the age-tiled roof and the bare branches surrounding the property. The 3-story mansion dating back to the Crane family's golden age. The place where Marcus had once hosted lavish gatherings, and where he had also met his fatal end 15 years earlier. Sarah sat in a small second-floor room, surrounded by screens displaying feeds from hidden cameras. Headphones pressed to her ears as she listened to every sound coming from the master bedroom where Vincent lay. He looked genuinely frail on the 4-poster bed draped in white sheets, his face pallid, his eyes closed. And she knew part of it was performance, but most of it was real. His body weakening by the day, the polonium having nearly destroyed his bone marrow completely, and without a marrow transplant within the next few weeks, he would truly die. Headlights appeared outside and through the camera. Sarah saw Richard Crane step out of a black Bentley, dressed in a gray cashmere coat, silver hair neatly combed, his face wearing the flawless expression of a concerned uncle coming to see his dying nephew. An expression that would have fooled her too if she did not already know the truth. Marco greeted Richard at the front door and escorted him upstairs, their footsteps echoing along the oak staircase, the soft creak of old boards sounding like the mansion itself, sighing as history repeated. Sarah held her breath as Richard entered the master bedroom. Vincent lay motionless, only the faint rise and fall of his chest showing he was still alive. The bedside lamp cast a dim golden glow, turning the room into a space waiting for death. "My boy," Richard said as he stepped closer, his voice heavy with practiced sorrow. "You called for me, and I came at once. I am always here for you." Vincent opened his eyes, gray and unfocused, and looked up at his uncle. "Uncle Richard," he murmured weakly. "Thank you for coming. I know you are busy." "Nothing is more important than you," Richard replied, as he sat beside the bed and took Vincent's hand in a gesture of false tenderness. "What did the doctors say? Is there any hope?" Vincent shook his head slowly and said, "End-stage bone marrow failure. They say I have only a few weeks left, maybe less." And in that moment Sarah saw it, the flicker in Richard's eyes. Victory. Fleeting and quickly concealed, but unmistakable. "I am so sorry," Richard said, his voice trembling as if holding back tears. "You are far too young. It is not fair." "Life is not fair," Vincent replied bitterly. "My father died young too. A car accident. Sudden. No one expected it." A heavy silence followed, and Sarah saw Richard's jaw tighten for a split second before he regained control. "Yes, Marcus was taken too soon. The greatest tragedy of our family. Have you ever thought it was not an accident?" Vincent asked casually. Though his gaze locked onto Richard with an intensity Sarah could see clearly through the camera. Richard froze for an instant. "Why would you think that?" "I am dying," Vincent said, "and when death draws near, people begin to look back, to question the things they accepted without asking." He paused and drew a labored breath. "I want the truth before I die, Uncle Richard. About my father. About what really happened that night." Sarah saw Richard hesitate, calculating, weighing his options, but she also saw the temptation. For 15 years, he had carried this secret. For 15 years, he had played the devoted uncle, while knowing he had killed his own brother. And now his nephew was dying. There would be no witnesses, no consequences, just 2 men in a room, and one of them would not live long enough to speak. "Do you truly want to know?" Richard asked, his voice subtly altered, softer and far more dangerous. "I do." Vincent nodded. "I need to know." Richard stood and moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered garden, his back to Vincent, but his face visible on camera. The mask had fallen away, and beneath it was the face of a murderer. "Marcus always had everything," Richard began bitterly. "The eldest son, the heir, our parents' pride. And me, I lived in his shadow, better than him in every way, yet never acknowledged." He turned back, eyes cold as ice. "When Marcus built this empire, I did all the dirty work. I ran the numbers, the deals, the partners. But who received the glory? Marcus. Always Marcus." "So you killed my father?" Vincent asked, his voice trembling now, not from weakness but from restrained fury. Richard smiled, the coldest smile Sarah had ever seen. "Breaks do not fail on their own. I planned it for a year, waited for the perfect moment, and when Marcus drove along Lakeshore Drive that night, I knew he would never come home." Nausea rose in Sarah's throat as she listened to a man confess to murdering his own brother without remorse. "And then you took power," Richard continued, stepping closer to the bed. 21 years old, naive. "I thought you would be easy to control. But you were more like your father than I expected, stronger than I expected, and you would not hand me the empire. So you poisoned me, Vincent said, his voice no longer weak. For 5 years, polonium-210, small doses every day. Richard stopped, brows lifting in genuine surprise. I know many things, Vincent said as he sat up slowly, no longer appearing to be on death's edge. His steel-gray eyes now sharp and burning as they fixed on Richard. I know you bought the polonium from Eastgate Chemical Supplies in Prague. I know Tony Bassett signed for the shipments, but the money came from your hidden account. And I know you recorded every dose in a black leather notebook hidden in the locked cabinet in your office. Richard staggered back, his expression shifting from shock to horror, and finally to pure rage. You trapped me, and you walked straight into it. The bedroom door opened. Marco entered with a gun drawn, and behind him Sarah stepped forward holding a small recorder. Everything you said has been recorded, she said coldly. 10 copies have already been sent to the most powerful figures in Vincent's empire. It is over, Richard. Richard looked from Sarah to Vincent to Marco, his face twisted with fury and despair. 15 years of waiting, of killing his brother, of poisoning his nephew, of sacrificing everything for the empire, undone in a single night by a woman who had once been a waitress and a plan he had never imagined. And then everything happened very fast. The bedroom window suddenly exploded inward, glass shattering like a hailstorm, and Tony Bassett burst into the room with a handgun in his grip. He had been hiding outside the estate the entire time, waiting for a signal from Richard, and the moment he heard movement from the control room, he knew the plan had been exposed. Marco reacted with lightning speed and swung his weapon toward Tony, but Tony was faster by a fraction of a second. The gunshot thundered through the enclosed room. Deafening and violent, Marco collapsed, clutching his left shoulder as blood seeped through his fingers. Even wounded, he tried to hold onto his weapon, but Tony kicked it away, and in the chaos Richard seized his chance and lunged at Sarah before she could react, his hand fisted in her hair and yanked her back hard against him. Sarah screamed in pain as the recorder slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. Then she felt the cold press of metal against her temple. A gun? Richard had been carrying one all along, hidden where no one had thought to look. Everything froze. Richard hissed, his voice stripped of civility and polished manners, and filled instead with madness and desperation. Or I will blow this girl's head open right in front of you, Vincent. Vincent had risen from the bed, his body trembling from exhaustion, but his steel-gray eyes still sharp and lethal. He held the gun Marco had hidden beneath the pillow, yet could not fire with Sarah held as a shield. Let her go, Richard, Vincent said, his voice low and dangerous. This is between you and me. She has nothing to do with it. Richard laughed, a wild, unhinged sound that echoed off the walls. Nothing to do with it. He tightened his grip around Sarah's throat until her breath faltered. This girl destroyed everything I built over 15 years. Without her, you would have died never knowing the truth. Without her, this empire would already be mine. Sarah fought to stay calm, though her heart hammered like it would burst. She felt Richard's hot breath against her neck, the expensive cologne mixed with the sharp stench of panic. He was losing control, and a killer without control was the most dangerous kind. Tony moved to Richard's side, his gun trained on Marco, bleeding on the floor, and Vincent standing by the bed. He glanced anxiously at his true master, and urged them to leave before Vincent's men arrived, but Richard shook his head, eyes locked on Vincent with pure hatred. Not yet. I waited too long to leave without watching you suffer. He pressed the gun harder into Sarah's head and sneered. Do you know, Vincent, the look on your face right now is exactly like Marcus when I cut his brake line, helpless, desperate, knowing that all the power in the world cannot save the person you care about. Vincent did not move, but Sarah saw his fingers tighten around the grip of the gun as he calculated and restrained himself to keep her alive. Drop the weapon, Richard ordered. Put it on the floor and kick it to me, or I will prove I am willing to kill anyone who stands in my way, just as I killed Marcus. Vincent met Sarah's eyes for a brief instant, and she saw the agony there. The war between protecting her and refusing to submit to the man who betrayed him. She shook her head slightly, silently begging him not to surrender. But Vincent did not listen. He slowly lowered the gun, placed it on the floor, and kicked it toward Richard. Tony snatched it up at once, now armed with 2 weapons. Richard laughed in triumph, the sound like a crow's cry in the blood-soaked room. You see, he mocked, this is why you never deserved the Empire. You are weak, you have feelings, you are willing to give up everything for a woman you met only weeks ago. He dragged Sarah toward the door, the gun never leaving her head. Tony followed, backing away with his weapon trained on Vincent and Marco. "Your father was just as weak," Richard continued venomously. "He could have killed me at any time. He knew I envied him, knew I resented living behind him, but he did nothing because he loved me, because he believed blood meant something." They reached the threshold and Richard turned back for one last look at Vincent. "And now you are the same. You could call your men in right now and sacrifice her to take me, but you will not, because you care about her, because you are weak just like your father." They moved into the hallway, Sarah dragged like a puppet, her feet stumbling on the old wooden floor. She heard footsteps behind them, and Vincent calling her name with a pain she had never heard in his voice. She could not answer with the gun still pressed to her head. They descended the staircase, Tony leading, Richard pulling her after him. The front door was ahead, and the Bentley still waited outside, and Sarah knew if they reached the car she would die. Richard had no reason to keep her alive once he escaped. She was only a tool for his escape, and tools were discarded when no longer useful. She had to act. She could not wait to be rescued, could not hope for a miracle. She had survived 7 orphanages, survived beatings, survived rape, survived an abusive husband. She could not die here. Not tonight. Not while Lily was still waiting for her to come home. Vincent appeared at the top of the stairs, unarmed with both hands raised. He descended, one step at a time, his eyes never leaving Sarah. "Let her go," he said calmly. "What do you want? Money, power. I want you dead," Richard roared. "I want to watch you die like I watched your father die. But first I want you to feel what it is like to lose someone you care about." He aimed the gun at Sarah, and his finger tightened on the trigger. In that split second, Sarah's fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, primal clarity. She was not just a woman facing a gunman. She was a mother whose death would leave her child alone in a cruel world, and she refused to let Lily become an orphan again. And in that instant, Sarah acted. Sarah drove the heel of her shoe down onto the top of Richard's foot, with every ounce of strength she had, the sickening crack of bone snapping through the air, along with his scream of pain, the blow throwing him off balance just as his finger tightened on the trigger, the gunshot detonating in the hallway, the bullet tearing past Sarah's head by only a few inches before burying itself in the ceiling, white plaster raining down like snow. And Sarah did not stop, because 7 years in orphanages had taught her that when you strike you keep going until the enemy cannot rise again. She twisted her body and slammed her elbow straight into Richard's throat with the full weight of herself behind it, his breath choking off as his hands flew to his neck, and the gun slipped from his grasp. Sarah lunged for the weapon, but Tony Bassett was faster, swinging his gun toward her with his finger on the trigger, and then another shot exploded, not from Tony but from the staircase. Vincent had grabbed Marco's fallen gun from the bedroom floor and charged down the stairs with a speed no one would have believed possible for a dying man, his bullet tearing into Tony's shoulder and spinning him like a marionette, with its strings cut, the gun skidding across the polished wooden floor. As Tony collapsed, screaming and clutching the blood-soaked wound, Richard writhed on the floor, hands still clawing at his throat, his face purple with the struggle for air. Sarah staggered back, legs shaking, heart slamming wildly with adrenaline, as she saw Vincent reach the last steps, his gun trained on Richard, his face carved from ice while his gray eyes burned with a fire she had never seen before. The front door burst open and Marco's men flooded in with weapons raised, securing the room in seconds after waiting outside for the signal or the sound of gunfire. Richard tried to rise, but Vincent was already there, driving his boot into Richard's chest and slamming him flat onto the floor, then lifting the gun and aiming it directly at his uncle's face. 15 years, Vincent said, his voice trembling not with weakness but with a fury held back for far too long. 15 years you played the loving uncle. 15 years you patted my shoulder and told me I was like my father. 15 years you poisoned me day by day and watched me die with a smile. Richard stared up at him with hatred still burning but fear gone, spitting blood as he snarled that he only regretted not killing Vincent sooner, that Vincent was just like Marcus, weak and sentimental and unworthy of the Empire. Vincent pulled the trigger, but the bullet did not strike Richard's head. It tore through his right shoulder, shattering bone, and ripping a scream from his throat. Then another shot into his left leg, his body convulsing as blood spread across the ancient wood floor. Vincent knelt beside him, his voice cold as steel as he whispered that he would not kill him quickly, that Richard had given him 5 years of pain and he would repay every second. Then Vincent stood and ordered Marco's men to take Richard to the south side basement and keep him alive until he decided otherwise. Richard was dragged away, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Tony Bassett hauled off as well. too broken to resist, and the room fell suddenly silent. Sarah sagged against the wall, her legs barely holding her, staring at her trembling hands as the reality hit her that she had nearly died, that a few inches more and the bullet would have taken her head instead of the ceiling. Vincent crossed the room to her, holstering his gun and gripping her shoulders, his gray eyes scanning her desperately for wounds, asking if she was hurt, where she felt pain. Sarah shook her head, her voice unsteady as she looked into his eyes and saw the fear, and something deeper and more fierce there. Vincent whispered that she was insane, his hand cupping her cheek, fingers shaking as he told her she could have been killed, that she almost died trying to save herself. And Sarah answered hoarsely that she had learned it from him, that sometimes you cannot wait for rescue and must act. Vincent stared at her, then pulled her into his arms and held her tightly as if afraid she would vanish if he let go. She felt his body shaking, his heart hammering, his breath hot against her hair as he begged her never to scare him like that again. Never. And Sarah did not promise, because she knew she could not. She only held him tighter to show she was still there, still alive, still fighting. And then Vincent collapsed, his body folding like a tower finally giving way, the adrenaline that had kept him upright draining out as his dying body could endure no more. Sarah screamed as she dropped to her knees beside him and shouted to the men around them to call an ambulance immediately. Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the intensive care unit. Cold, white fluorescent lights washed over the silent corridor at 3 a.m. as Sarah sat on a hard plastic chair outside the ICU, both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, unable to remember whether she had taken a single sip. Vincent's blood still stained her clothes, dried into dark brown streaks like the map of a tragedy she could not escape. 3 days had passed, 3 days since the night at the Lake Forest estate, 3 days with Vincent lying motionless in the ICU, his body threaded with tubes and machines, 3 days of Sarah moving back and forth between the hospital and the penthouse, forcing herself to appear calm in front of Lily, while inside she was breaking apart piece by piece. Dr. Patterson, the leading hematology specialist Marco, had hired for a sum large enough to buy a house, stepped out of the ICU with a grave expression. Sarah sprang to her feet, the coffee cup falling to the floor unnoticed, and the doctor looked at her with eyes worn by exhaustion but filled with compassion as he said Vincent's bone marrow had completely failed, that the polonium had destroyed his body's ability to produce blood cells, and that without a bone marrow transplant within 1 week, Vincent would die. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. She had known this was coming and had prepared herself for it, yet hearing the words spoken aloud was entirely different from anticipating them. She asked about the donor registry in a hoarse voice, whether everything had been checked, and Dr. Patterson shook his head helplessly, explaining they had searched every national and international database, that Vincent Crane's blood type was rare, and his HLA markers even rarer, and that there was no compatible donor in the system. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting the panic tightening in her chest. She had tested herself the moment Vincent was admitted. The result negative, not a match. Marco was not a match either. No one close to Vincent was. She asked about his family, even though she already knew the answer. Richard was the only one left, and Richard was imprisoned somewhere awaiting the fate Vincent had chosen for him. The doctor confirmed that Vincent's parents were deceased, that he had no siblings, and that the uncle was not an option, and even if Richard were compatible, Sarah doubted Vincent would accept bone marrow from the man who had tried to kill him. 1 week, Sarah whispered to herself. Only 1 week, standing in the sterile hospital corridor beneath the unforgiving lights, she felt hope slipping through her fingers like sand. She had saved Vincent from the poisoned drink, uncovered the betrayal, helped him face Richard, yet she could not save him from the death closing in without a suitable donor. And then a terrible thought sparked in her mind, one she had pushed away for 3 days because it was too frightening to consider. Lily, her 5-year-old daughter, too young to endure a bone marrow procedure, too innocent to understand the weight of such a choice, yet the only person left she could test. No, she told herself. She could not pull her child into this. But then she thought of Vincent lying unconscious in his hospital bed, of the gray eyes that had looked at her with a gentleness she never believed she deserved, of the kiss at dawn, of the way he read bedtime stories to Lily in a warm, steady voice about princesses and dragons, of the drawing Lily had made with the word family scrawled beneath it. Dr. Patterson, Sarah heard herself say, as if from far away. I want to test one more person. When he asked who, she answered, my daughter, she is 5. The doctor looked startled, then hesitant, reminding her that harvesting bone marrow from a child required special consent and psychological evaluation, that there were risks, however small, and that the child must understand. Sarah interrupted him, saying she knew, that she only wanted the test first, that if Lily was not compatible, there would be nothing more to discuss, and if she was, then she would talk to her daughter and let her decide. Dr. Patterson studied her for a long moment and then nodded, instructing her to bring the child to the lab the next morning for blood work, with results in 24 hours. Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice with any further words. That night she returned to the penthouse and stood in Lily's doorway for a long time, watching her sleep in the princess bed with a stuffed bear clutched tightly in her arms, her face peaceful and unaware of the storm surrounding their lives. The next morning, Sarah took Lily to the hospital under the pretense of a routine checkup. Lily asked few questions, simply holding her mother's hand and bravely allowing the nurse to draw blood. "You were so brave," Sarah whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. The following 24 hours were the longest of Sarah's life. She wandered the penthouse like a ghost, sat beside Vincent's ICU bed holding his hand, though he did not know she was there, and prayed to a God she was not sure she believed in. When the phone rang the next afternoon, her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. Dr. Patterson's voice came through the line, telling her the results were in, sounding almost in disbelief. "It is a miracle, Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "The odds of an unrelated donor matching perfectly are 1 in 10 million. Yet your daughter is a 100% match. It is a medical anomaly we cannot explain, but she is the ideal donor we have been praying for." Sarah sank to the floor with the phone still pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face without her noticing. She had her answer, and now she faced the hardest decision of her life. That evening, Sarah sat beside Lily on the princess bed, in the softly lit bedroom glowing with warm golden light, her daughter hugging the stuffed bear, and looking up with wide, curious eyes when she noticed how serious her mother seemed. And Sarah drew in a deep breath as she searched for the simplest words to explain the most difficult truth she had ever faced. "My love," she began gently, taking Lily's small hand in her own, "I need to talk to you about something very important. Uncle Vincent is very sick. Do you remember him? The one who reads you stories?" Lily nodded, her curiosity turning into concern. "Uncle Vincent is sick. Mommy, sick like when I have a fever. Too much sicker than that, sweetheart," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady as her heart tightened. "He needs something special from inside a body to get better. And you have that something." Lily tilted her head, her clear eyes searching her mother's face. "What do I have?" "Inside your bones, there are special cells," Sarah explained slowly. "Doctors can take a little bit and put them into Uncle Vincent's body to help him heal. Will it hurt?" Sarah did not lie. She never lied to Lily, no matter how hard the truth was. "Yes, sweetheart. You will be asleep when the doctors take it, so you will not feel anything then. But when you wake up, it will hurt for a few days, like when you fall off your bike, only a little more." Lily fell silent, her small face so serious it nearly broke Sarah's heart. A 5-year-old, thinking about a choice no child should ever have to make. "If I do not help, will Uncle Vincent die?" "Mommy," the question pierced straight through Sarah. She wanted to lie, to protect her child from that cruelty, but she could not. "Maybe, my love," she whispered, "he might die." Lily looked down at her bear, tiny fingers smoothing the worn fur. Then she lifted her head, her eyes shining with a resolve Sarah had never seen before. "I want to help Uncle Vincent," Lily said clearly. "He reads stories really well. He never skips pages like Mrs. Chen, and he makes you laugh." "Mommy, you do not laugh very much. Are you sure?" Sarah asked as tears spilled despite her effort to hold them back. "You do not have to do this if you are scared. Mommy will not be mad, I am sure." Lily nodded firmly. "I am brave. You say I am brave, and brave people help others when they need it. Right, Mommy?" Sarah pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her so tightly she feared hurting her, tears soaking Lily's hair as Sarah whispered that she was the bravest person she had ever known and that she loved her more than anything. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. Dr. Patterson prepared everything, and the best medical team was assembled. Lily was taken into the preoperative room wearing a pale blue hospital gown far too big for her small body. She held her mother's hand as the nurse administered anesthesia, her wide eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "Mommy," Lily murmured as the medication took effect. "When I wake up, can I have ice cream?" "As much ice cream as you want," Sarah promised, kissing her daughter's forehead. "I will be right here when you wake up." Lily's eyes slowly closed and her breathing evened into the rhythm of induced sleep. Sarah stood watching as her child was wheeled into surgery, the doors closing behind her, and it felt as though a part of Sarah went in with her. 3 hours passed with Sarah praying without pause in the waiting room, Mrs. Rossi sitting beside her, and Marco standing guard in the hallway like an unmoving statue. No one spoke because there was nothing to say. When Dr. Patterson emerged, Sarah jumped to her feet so fast she nearly fell. "Both surgeries were successful," he said with a tired but relieved smile. "Your daughter is recovering very well. She was incredibly brave. And Mr. Crane is responding positively to the transplant. The new bone marrow has begun to function." Sarah did not remember whether she cried or laughed or both, only that her legs gave out and someone helped her back into a chair, that her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it, that relief flooded her like light breaking through a darkness that had lasted too long. Lily woke 2 hours later, and her first request was for chocolate ice cream. Her second question was whether Uncle Vincent was going to be all right. Sarah sat by her daughter's bed holding the small hand covered in IV lines, and for the first time in weeks she smiled for real. "Uncle Vincent is going to be okay," she said softly, kissing Lily's forehead. "Because of you. You saved him." Lily smiled, her eyes heavy with medication yet bright with joy. "Then Uncle Vincent owes me a really big teddy bear," she declared, "and he has to read me stories every day until I stop hurting." Sarah laughed through her tears and nodded, certain that he would happily agree. 6 months later, the late afternoon sunlight poured through the glass walls of the lakeside mansion on Lake Michigan, bathing the expansive living room in gold as blue water stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Lily's laughter rang out from the garden, where she chased the golden retriever Vincent had given her after the surgery, and Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching the scene with a smile she could not suppress. Her daughter had fully recovered. The heart surgery had been a complete success 3 months earlier, performed by the finest doctors in the country at a cost. Vincent had insisted on paying despite Sarah's protests. Lily was now a healthy, lively 5-year-old with rosy cheeks and laughter as clear as wind chimes, and Vincent had been declared in full remission 2 months ago. The new bone marrow from Lily was functioning perfectly, and his body was regenerating blood cells at an astonishing rate. The only traces left from 5 years of poisoning were invisible scars in his soul, and even those were slowly healing with time. Richard had been dealt with according to the laws of the underworld. No one ever found his body, and no one asked questions. The underbosses of the Crane Empire had heard Richard's recorded confession and agreed that Vincent had every right to do whatever he wished with the traitor. Tony Bassett was serving life in a federal prison for trafficking radioactive materials and conspiracy to commit murder. Vincent himself had changed. He began restructuring the entire empire, gradually reducing illegal operations and shifting toward legitimate business. The process would take many years, but it had begun. He acquired Monarch Pharmaceuticals, the company that had framed Sarah, dismissed the entire former leadership, and restored her research rights. Sarah now ran her own laboratory on the company grounds, developing non-addictive pain medication for cancer patients. The work she had always dreamed of but never believed she would be able to do. The 3 of them had moved into this lakeside home 4 months earlier, far from the flickering lights of Chicago and far from painful, dangerous memories. Lily attended the local elementary school, made new friends, and no longer worried about rent or the next meal. And Sarah and Vincent were learning how to build an ordinary life amid extraordinary circumstances. The smell of something burnt pulled Sarah from her thoughts, and she turned to see Vincent standing at the stove looking confused, a wooden spatula in hand, and a pan of eggs completely charred. "I think I did something wrong," he said with the seriousness of reporting a failed business deal. Sarah laughed, stepping in to turn off the stove. A mafia boss who could control the entire city of Chicago, but could not cook a pan of eggs. Vincent looked at her with mock offense, and said he was learning, and that she was undermining his confidence. Sarah shook her head, still laughing, took a new pan, and started breakfast again, while Vincent stood beside her, unhelpful yet unwilling to leave, simply watching her with a look she never imagined she would see from him 6 months earlier, gentle, peaceful, and full of love. That evening, after Lily had gone to sleep, Vincent led Sarah onto the balcony overlooking Lake Michigan. The full moon shone bright across the water, forming a silver path to the horizon. Gentle spring breeze brushed her hair, carrying the scent of lake water and blooming lilacs. Vincent opened a bottle, and Sarah recognized the label instantly. Scotch, the same kind as that night at the Velvet Room, the same kind Richard had poisoned. She raised an eyebrow, and he smiled, pouring 2 glasses and offering one to her. She did not take it immediately, and out of deeply ingrained habit examined the glass in the moonlight for anything unusual. Vincent laughed and asked if she still did not trust him. "Old life-saving habits die hard," she replied as she took the glass. She sipped, letting the strong, warm scotch spread through her throat, with no metallic taste, no numbness, only pure alcohol. "Safe," she whispered, handing the glass back, and he drank from the same glass, never taking his eyes off her. Then he set it down and turned fully toward her. "Sarah," he said, more seriously than usual, and her heart began to race for reasons she could not name. He took a deep breath, and then he knelt down. Sarah froze, unable to believe what she was seeing, as Vincent Crane, the King of Chicago, the man who once terrified the entire underworld, knelt before her beneath the moonlight, holding a small black velvet box. He opened it, revealing a simple, elegant ring, a small diamond set in platinum, glowing softly in the moonlight. "6 months ago, you saved my life by spilling a glass of wine," Vincent said, his voice trembling with emotion. He did not hide. "You gave me a reason to live when I was ready to die. You gave me a family when I believed I would be alone forever." He looked up at her, his gray eyes shining. "I do not deserve you. I know that. I have done terrible things and carry too many sins to count. But if you give me a chance, I will spend the rest of my life trying to become a man worthy of you and Lily." He lifted the ring and asked Sarah Mitchell, "Will you marry me?" Sarah looked down at the man she once feared, the man she once saw as a monster, and the man she now loved with everything she had. She thought of their journey from that first night at the Velvet Room, to this moment from an anonymous waitress, to a woman standing on the balcony of a dream home, from fear to love, from darkness to light. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face and a radiant smile on her lips. "Yes, I will." Vincent stood, hands trembling, as he placed the ring on her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her beneath the moon over Lake Michigan. A kiss tasting of Scotch, happy tears and promises meant to be kept. When they parted, a small voice came from the balcony door saying, "Uncle Vincent is kissing Mommy." Lily stood there in princess pajamas, clutching her teddy bear, eyes bright with excitement, and asked if that meant he would be her father. Vincent and Sarah looked at each other and laughed, and Vincent stepped forward, lifting Lily into his arms, and said seriously that it depended on whether she agreed to let him be her dad, because she was the one who decided. Lily pretended to think, tapping her chin just like adults on television, and declared that she agreed, but only if Dad read her stories every night, never skipped pages, and bought her another dog. Vincent laughed and said that was too many conditions, but agreed. Lily squealed, hugging his neck, and Sarah watched them, her heart so full she thought it might burst with happiness. This was her family, built from pain and loss, bound by courage and sacrifice, and sustained by unconditional love. The lights of the mansion glowed in the night, like a lighthouse on the shore of Lake Michigan, guiding the lost, promising peace to those who had weathered too many storms, and reminding us that even in the darkest night a light always waits, for those brave enough to seek it. The story of Sarah and Vincent reminds us that life sometimes pushes us into situations that seem impossible to escape, yet in the darkest moments, courage and compassion can change everything. A single decision, a single brave act, can create a domino effect that transforms our lives and the lives of those around us. Sometimes those who seem least deserving of salvation are the ones who need love the most. And sometimes when we give without expecting anything in return, we receive more than we ever dared to dream. Dear friends, this is where today's story comes to an end. Thank you for taking the time to listen. If this story touched your heart, please like and share this video with those you love. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss our daily stories. We would love to hear what you truly feel. What did this story make you think about in your own life? Have you ever faced a difficult decision that changed everything? Please share with us in the comments below. We wish all of you watching good health, a joyful life filled with love and peace. May each of your days be calm and gentle. Sometimes the strongest love stories begin with a single brave act and end with a family worth fighting for. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.